All right, everybody, welcome to episode 4 of Worldwide Slot Car Chat. I am Greg Galb, your host, otherwise known as Mr. Flippant on the forums, primarily 1/32nd scale analog and digital slot car racer. And I'd like to have everybody just do a short introduction like that, and then we can get into, personal history of slot cars for anybody who hasn't already given that and wants to give it, Richard and Martin and Andy. And then we'll go, just start chatting. Gary, go ahead with a quick one.
Gary Skip from the UK. Without giving my life story, I'm behind Disca, so I do a lot of digital racing, most notably the Le Mans 24 Hours and the GT3 Euro Series.
All right, and then viewers of this episode who haven't seen previous episodes can watch previous episode to learn a whole lot more about Gary's history. Richard, I don't think you've been on yet, so why don't you go ahead and tell us everything about you.
All right, okay. So I'm Richard Perry. I live in Wales, which is a little enclave just to the left of England. You should see me on the forums as Mr. Modifier. You may also know about the Shore Change Guide, which I came up with as a way of solving LED reliability issues. That's the guide with the LED on the front. I also make tyres and stuff like that. I've been digital racing for about the last 8 years, actually introduced to it by Martin. Hi, Martin.
My fault.
It's purely digital. We run the only digital club in Wales. There's only about 3 or 4 digital clubs in the whole of the UK. I just love the format. I love the strategy, the race strategy of running SSDC and with all the fuel and the strategy behind it. That's it for the moment. I've got some surprises to share with you later. But I didn't have a slot car set when I was a kid. My father bought me a train set, and I've discovered very quickly you can't race trains. So I'm making up for it now.
Not properly, anyways. I mean, what kid didn't crank it up to full blast and watch it crash and stuff? So, Richard or Mr. Modifier, how do you pronounce the name of that slot car club?
Puntafunon.
Puntafunon.
Puntafunon. With Welsh, a Y is pronounced as an sound. A double F is actually an F sound. An F on its own is pronounced like a V, just to confuse things. But it's Puntafunon. It means a place with a fountain.
Ah, cool. So now I know. I was thinking Pantaphenon.
Yeah. No, Puntafunon.
Thank you for that. Martin, would you like to?
I've actually been to Pen and Hindu Daidrith.
That wasn't a bad attempt.
Your turn, Martin.
Okay, I'm Martin, sniffing on the forums. I started off with a digital set. Well, I didn't. I started off in 1966 with a Scalextric 50 set, but got back into it about 10 years ago with an SSD set.
Where are you going?
Found some analog clubs, enjoyed the cut and thruster racing, and Gary got me back into digital with this event, the 24-hour Disco event at Henley and Arden. So that was my reintroduction to digital. But yeah, I race everything I can, when I can, where I can. Just enjoy the cut and thruster racing.
There's nothing quite like it. I mean, side by side in analog racing is a blast when you've got somebody to really spar with. But when you're changing lanes, it's a whole different thing. Much more challenging. That most of the analog guys didn't really get into the digital.
Right. So when you get the Disco events, Gary's events, they're just fantastic. We have them at 3 or 4 different clubs, and they're good events.
Andy, your turn.
So Andy Pinchuk, I go by DVD 3500 on some forums.
I know who you are.
I was afraid of that. And on some I go as Carrera ARP because I actually started off. I live in Germany, but I'm actually from Michigan. No German accent. And I started off here in Germany with a Carrera set. Carrera during the dark ages, as they call it, sold really cheap sets similar to Scalextric Start, and so I started with that. But for too long of a story to go into, I ended up getting into Scalextric instead, mostly because I wanted to be able to do digital and analog at the same time. And I just really like the tracks. I like the look of them, and I like the way they're milled. And I've got 2 kids. One's a teenager now. One's becoming a teenager. And I love the fact that I can move the track around physically, like pick up sections of the track and get it away. I mean, we do have a house, so we do have a track set up most of the time, but you have to get, move it around and stuff. But my very first track was a Tyco set. Like most kids in America, I started off in HO, and it was my parents bought me 2 figure-of-8s. They were Camaro Z28s, and I still have that set in the U.S. And I still, when I go there, thanks to a lot of the tips I found on forums and stuff, I've treated the rails with automatic transmission fluid, got some inox, smuggled it into the U.S. and it still runs. I only go to the States about once every year, every 2 years, but it's everything, just plug it in and it works. And yeah, so a little bit of digital. I do go to a local club, which is right next to the Hockenheim Ring, which is only 5 miles away from my house. And that's pure analog. I'm trying to get them into digital, but there's an awful lot of resistance there. And we mostly race 1/24 scale. I was actually hoping to show you guys one of the cars, because some of the pictures, there's been some articles in the Slot Car magazine by me where we've taken close-ups of the cars where you literally cannot tell the difference between the real car and the model cars. Michael Niemas is one of the main builders of the cars there. And so I attend that. I'm nowhere good at building like those guys, and I'm nowhere near, I'm always defending the second to the last place in every race, but it's fun. So,
So Andy, do you know Fola Osu then?
Who? Oh,
Fola.
Fola, yeah.
Yeah.
I've not met him yet. He's on my list of one of these people. He and Michael Niemas do a lot of stuff together. I've seen a lot of his cars. I've never been in an event where he's been at. And of course, there are no events going on right now. But yeah, he does some amazing work too.
Yeah, he does. He does.
Very cool. Thank you for the introduction. Lance, would you like to give us a little bit of history about yourself? You're currently muted. Let me see if I can unmute you here. Where are you? There you are. Okay, now you're unmuted, but I still can't hear you. All right, we'll have to circle back around to you, Lance. Sorry about that. Anthony, do you want to unmute yourself and tell us a little about yourself?
If I've got it right. So I haven't lost track of how to be in a meeting. So I've just retired. It was quite a shock. So I go by the infamous name of AB321 on the forums. I'm one of the guys that started up the new forum, and I tend to think that we slightly hated for it. But we didn't mean any harm. We honestly didn't mean any harm by it. We couldn't deal with the current owners of SFI any longer. They were just impossible, and too much going on in the background. So we pulled out and started Slot Racer Online. I started slot cars, I think about 1963, 64. Got my first, woke up on a Christmas morning, and there was my first Scalextric set. GP33. I still have a GP33 set, not the original one, because I sold all my Scalextrics around 1970 to go and buy a 10-speed bicycle. So, and that's how it went. And then I started collecting again in the 80s and then dropped out. Got very involved in the 90s. In those days, I was racing wing cars, those kind of really high-speed cobalt motor machines, but I lost interest in it. I think it's because and this is personal, and there's no pointing fingers at anybody here. Just for me, they didn't look like cars, and I loved the car that I'd always loved is the Cox Lotus 30, and I kept thinking of that car. And then when I moved to Europe, I fell away from it and sold everything off to a guy in Italy, and then just started collecting. And now I'm into historics, as you may gauge. And I race in Bordeaux every year when we are able to have the race. I build more than I race, to be honest with you. I know a lot of you guys do a lot of racing, but I build rather than race at the moment. Maybe it's a language thing. However, I do know Michael Nemus, I know Folo Osu, I know a lot of the guys who raced at IMCA. I did IMCA races 3 years here in Belgium. Giovanni Montiglio, I know very well, things like that. So kind of been around I try to keep in the background, to be quite honest with you. That's my history. Still building.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Lance, do you want to give your microphone another try? All right, it's not working. So let's, does anybody have anything that they want to show and tell? I think Richard mentioned something earlier. Do you want to do that now or later?
I've got a show and tell because in my man cave, as well as my track in the background, I also happen to have a 3D printer there, and I've started messing about building. My best way for me to scratch build is actually draw it on a CAD package, which I've had to learn to use, and print it up on the printer because it's replicable. So I came up with this chassis, which has got height adjustable front axle for the sole purpose of building the original electric vehicle, the ubiquitous vehicle. So I don't know, Europeans and Brits will remember the milk floats. Do you guys know what a milk float is? An electric delivery vehicle for milk, very popular back in the 60s and 70s. So I made one. In 1/32 scale.
You can put Google behind the wheel.
It is digitized. No, that's a tractor driver. I didn't make the driver.
Oh.
I didn't make the metal bits, but everything else came off of my 3D printer. And that's
Is it Ernie?
That's a unique branded one. And for the racers, I did a golf branded one.
The bottles and everything were 3D printed.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, that was good fun. The bottles are very small. I've got another one in the pipeline. So yeah, when you print the bottles off, you print the bottles as inserts. So there they are. Little shape there, and you print off the crates to put them in. Glue them in the crates, and the thing itself comes off the printer in kit form. So there's the front. That's the front end of it. There's part of the roof. There's the other part of the roof goes together. So basically, you have to design a plastic kit to go off the printer, and glue the thing together with super glue. So it's quite good fun. So I've got the two milk floats running around as pace cars on my track, and I'm using my fiber slots cars like this little yellow Beetle taxi to drive around and dodge in amongst them. So I've got one milk float in one lane and one in the other, and use them for practicing how to read the track in advance.
Explain the odd spell in a taxi there, Rich.
The taxi. This is a fiber slots car made by a guy called Mark, who's found on the Slot Forum. It's a vac form body shell, and he does his chassis, which are basically, the chassis are quite cool because it's machined out of fiberglass sheet. Everything. So the cross members are like that. So everything basically clips together. He's got a very clever end piece here, which goes short for the short cans or goes further up for a long can. You got the cross pieces, and I've actually 3D printed a tray. So rather have a metal cross piece, I've got a 3D printed tray there to sit a digital chip in. So this is chipped, and there's an Austin A35, which is quite cool. And my personal favourite, bear with me a sec. My personal favourite is the Morris Minor he makes, which is quite fun. But
what's the Kit Kat on?
You up?
Why you got Kit Kat on it?
Because it's a Moggy.
Very clever. Very clever.
Why not? It's a fantasy livery. These things are designed by Mark to be like banger races. You know, which is why they haven't got any glass in them or whatever. But yeah, and because it gives the molded in tray without a driver's head, so I had to 3D print a driver's head as well. But so yeah, the 3D printer comes in really handy for stuff like
Interesting you went down the line of electric vehicles, Richard, because although the milk float's a bit quirky, I've often thought that the first among us to produce some decent Formula E cars could actually make them better than the real thing.
Yes.
I'm not really a fan of one-to-one Formula E, but I think as a slot car they could be pretty entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Carrera did the early model, but let's be honest, we all want the next gen cars because they look amazing.
Yeah.
So I've seen a couple of guys on Instagram, I think they were 24th scale maybe, do some next gen Formula E cars. But I think
because the wheels are enclosed, aren't they? The problem we've had with Formula One digital racing is that as soon as you touch wheel to wheel, you've got an in the air accident. So we've never really got on with open wheelers racing digitally. But we race on quite short tracks, 20-meter tracks. So you're talking 6 or 7 second laps. Then there's too much traffic to contend with open wheelers. But I think the Formula E, because there's enough bodywork to stop rubber to rubber, could be quite a good formula.
Well, maybe as someone with a 3D printer, that's something you could experiment with.
Yeah, the problem with Formula E though is the body panels will be really, really thin.
And you'd have to figure out a way to sort of simplify it or represent what's going on.
Well, the way to do it would be to make your mold, print the thing 3D, finish it off, and then take a mold off of it. I think, and then cast it. If you slash cast it in resin, that would probably work quite well.
Or you could go down the nano-slot route. Those bodies, just make 3 bodies for each time you go out. Understanding it, you're going to crack them.
Or maybe somebody should vac form them. Looking at them, you might be able to vac form in parts. I don't know. But I did the milk floats because they were quirky. I just happened to stumble across one when I was going through YouTube on something, and I thought, I've never seen one of those as a slot car. And I had a hunt around and couldn't find one, so I thought I'll make it.
How hard is it to scale those? Like, could you scale to 1/24th with it, or scale it down to a little bit smaller size, or 1/43rd?
You can scale it because if you with the slicer, the thing that takes your 3D model and gets it ready to go on the printer, you can apply a percentage X, Y, and Z magnification to it. So as long as you got your percentages right, yes, you could scale it up for 1/24th. No problem. The only thing you wouldn't want to scale would be the engine mounts on the chassis. So you'd probably need to make the chassis again. But everything else could be scaled up in the slicer. It's
I was wondering, I didn't post this online because I saw your thread earlier this morning and I enjoyed reading about it. I was wondering if you were planning to produce and sell or upload the models for other people to print, or what's your plan with those fun things?
I didn't have much of a plan. I just enjoy being a bit different and being a bit quirky. And I think if somebody wanted to have the things in kit form and play around them, then I'd be open to that. If somebody wanted one, then I haven't got an overinflated version of what it's worth. The problem with these things, it takes a long time to print. So all told, all the components to make one of those takes about 10 hours to print. Now, you don't have to be in attendance while you're doing it, but it still takes a long time to print them off. But I think some guys down the club probably want them, so we may end up with a set of 6 of these to race down at the club, which could be fun.
That would be hilarious. I did want to note, I saw
surprisingly well, although it looks quite bulky. It weighs about 130 grams, which is about the same as a Scalextric's truck, and most of the weight is low down. And although it's got a short wheelbase, the guide is purposefully quite a way forward from the front axle, which helps with stability. So, and with the height adjustable front axle, you can actually get a decent amount of stability. So it's you can slide on demand, but yeah, it's surprisingly stable going around the corners. I was surprised myself. I had no idea what it was going to be going like. So when it went round the corner, it went round about 10 laps without falling over. I had a great big smile on my face.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing a 6-car race of those things. That would be hilarious. I did notice that Lance put in a little text message because his microphone wasn't working. He says, I'm Lance, known as Lance-A-Lot-of Love. Like most had slot cars as a kid, Eldon, Tyco, Sizzlers, TCR. Visited commercial raceway that runs JK and fast wing cars, but he's not into the wing cars. He likes more realistic looking 1/32 cars, and he's into proxy racing. Proxy racing, that's something that we haven't talked a lot about, so that might be a good topic to talk about. The concept, I love the concept. I've participated in a couple, both as a racer and as a host. So, anybody who's been involved in proxy racing, or has questions about proxy racing, I think that'd be a good topic to partake of. Richard, did you have anything else that you wanted to show and tell or talk about?
No, that's fine. Thank you for putting up with me.
Yeah, not a problem. So now we've gotten past. Is anybody without a video? I see we have several people who are in without camera, and that's okay.
I am without camera. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I am using my wife's computer today, and it has a camera issue like my other ones. It's Chris Walker here.
Okay.
I go under Chris Guy W, and I just wanted to say a quick shout to Anthony, who showed up this week. I've corresponded a bit back with Anthony back and forth. And as I've told you guys before, I started racing in '61. I've raced everything from HO to a lot of times, a lot of years spent on the wing car circuit and a bit of IMCA that we had. We held the Worlds in 2009 in Toronto. And a guy by the name of Mark Campbell and I had the track commission for the 2009 Worlds. So I've done some IMCA stuff. Unfortunately, in North America, there's really no IMCA racing. So I'm doing, and wing car racing's died out. So most of my time now is spent at club racing and a hell of a lot of proxy racing.
Excellent. So you can be a source of information for proxy racing questions.
Well,
I just want to say thank you and great to hear and know that you're here, Chris. You're my absolute guru with your simple cars. You ever forgiven me for that comment?
Absolutely.
Way back in the day, I called these cars simple. And what I mean by that is to get a car, to build a car that has literally got a paint job on and some decals, and it's perfect, is so difficult. And every single one of your cars is like that, Chris. It just, I wish, and I'm not trying to be funny when I say this, I wish I had 10% of your talent. They're mind-boggling. I love your cars.
Well, I tell you what, I'm in a huge vintage build mode right now, and I'm building a monster AMT Lola T70 with a John Havlicek motor and a bunch of chassis mods. And when I'm done with it, I'll send it to you and you can have it.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Take it to Bordeaux, and it's going to be a monster.
And as for John Havlicek's motors, thank you for the introduction.
It's funny. I have not seen him post in several months now. He's in New Jersey, and I'm a little bit nervous on potentially how he's doing. So I've got to give him a shout and find out what's going on, because I haven't seen him. I haven't talked to him in ages.
Yeah, let's hope he's okay. I hope there's nothing wrong.
Well, that's.
Let us know. Please let us know if you hear anything.
Yeah, I will. New Jersey's not the best place to be right now, or not one of the better places to be. So we'll see how he's doing.
Do you know Doug?
Doug.
Johnson, is it? Photographer.
Yeah.
Do you know him?
Yeah.
You guys all stick together in Canada.
Well, sort of.
We
don't really.
I think I need to move.
He's 4,000 miles away from me.
I can't understand.
He's in the West Coast, Vancouver, but he has apparently bought a house in Toronto, and he's going to be 5 minutes away from the commercial / club track that I help out when I'm around. So I should be seeing more of
him. And if you come on next week, can we see a picture of you, please?
Yeah, see if we can get that camera working.
Yeah. A picture of what, Anthony? Sorry?
A picture of you.
Well, yeah, you might. I can tell you, my cars generally look better than I do. So I'm not too worried that the fact that my camera is not working. But yes, the last couple of weeks I grabbed my wife's computer. We're at our summer cottage, summer lake house right now. So I plugged it in, and lo and behold, the camera's not working. So there you go.
That happens.
Sorry for interrupting. Thank you.
Looks like Wayne joined us. Wayne, would you like to tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, hi guys. Bright and early here, 4:30 a.m. in Australia, which is normal for me anyway, because I have to get up to go to work normally. So today I actually have a day off, but that's cool. I got up to go just to come and see you guys and see what was going on.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've been racing for since about 2008, 9, something like that. We had a commercial set up on the Gold Coast that was there for a couple of years. Then he moved. He had like 6 tracks and was in the process of building a massive 5-lane that was about 50-meter lane length. So it was a big track. He finally got that finished, and then he had to move shops. So I lost contact for a bit, and he ended up having the 3 main tracks there when we finally found him again. And that's sort of been in and out, whittled away. The big track that he built still exists, but it's in the process now of being redone at one of the guys' houses in his shed. So it must be a big shed, because it needs like a 10-meter by probably 6-meter space at least to get the track in. It's massive.
You've got quite an active Australian group.
Oh yeah, the Queensland is pretty good. Victoria's pretty good. New South is also strong, and South Australia have got a couple of good commercial places there, but there's not too many commercial places left at the moment. They're sort of, like most things, fading away. There's one in the north side of Brisbane that's still going. He's got a drag track, a scale track where they had a 24 scale championships run there a year or so ago, and I think he has a 4-lane Carrera as well. That's 2 hours for me to get to, and I've got to go through the traffic, and it's hell. But we've got, on the coast now, we've got a little group there of about maybe 6 to 10 regulars. We've got a home track. The guy built himself. He's a builder, and he built his track in his house, and it's a little 4-laner. And we race mainly scaly, slide it, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, though, we do race with magnets. The guys just like it, and yeah, I'm not so sure.
I mean, it's just another type of racing. A lot of us don't like it, but it's got its pros and cons. To me,
it does.
A lot of people say, well, magnet racing is easier, but what I found is that magnet racing, competitively racing with magnets, is harder, because you have a much thinner line between staying on and coming off, and once you're off, you're off. With magless racing, you can see it bobble a little bit and back off, but when the magnet lets go, your
No,
car
it lets go.
yeah, and then there's more damage because you're usually going a lot faster when it comes off, and it goes flying,
Exactly.
slams against the wall, and breaks all kinds of things.
It does.
But I would not put myself up against a magnet racer who's been racing with magnet cars and who, any day, because they've just got the timing down, and they've come to that razor thin line between staying on and coming off. I can hold my own with the regular guys, but somebody who's competitively racing regularly with magnet cars, their reflexes are just honed for that kind of racing. It's just different.
Yeah.
So Wayne, are
So
you
you're saying
down
that
Surface Way?
Sorry.
Somebody's gonna have to just go.
I was just going to say, are you saying that then a magnet racer will be faster on a non-magnet track than a non-magnet racer will be on a magnet track?
Ooh, tough one. Will a magnet racer be faster on a non-magnet track than No, I think a magless racer will find speed on a magnet track sooner than a magnet racer will find on a non-magnet track.
I've got to agree with Greg, because when you're racing without a magnet, the things you're doing to drive the car, if you then translate that into a mag car, you're still going to win. Whereas if when you drive a mag car without paying too much attention to how you're driving it, you're just sort of navigating the course. If you then try and drive a non-magnet car in that way, you're going to be way behind.
Yeah,
exactly.
Between the two, it's mainly about different braking points and different amounts of brake. Like when I switch to magnet racing, I usually turn my brakes down, so I'm coasting through the turns more than a magless car, where I'll want usually a lot of brakes to scrub off as much speed as I need to go around the turn. Whereas
there's a very good strategy to use if you're driving with magnets. Just grit your teeth harder.
the trigger
There's a lot more
go faster.
I get
non-mag.
far quicker racing magnets. I get lockjaw far quicker racing magnets than racing magless.
And magless, you need the tire traction far more than you need with mag. You got to have the mechanical grip far better, haven't you? So.
Yeah.
You learn a lot about tuning slot cars if you take the magnets out, because everything is exposed.
But
first 2 months, gluing bits back on.
We got rid of magnets at our club because we found that people with cars, especially GT cars with low noses, were basically just snow ploughing. They didn't bother to change lanes to overtook. They just took you out from behind. And then on one particular occasion, somebody had trouble with their car, and I said, I'll have a look at it. And I took the body off before they could stop me, and there was a magnet stacked on top of the magnet. So we decided to ban magnets then, because everybody then has the same amount of downforce. And the racing etiquette, the quality of racing improved a lot, because when you hit somebody when you're without a magnet, you've got a 50-50 chance of coming off yourself. Whereas with magnets, you hit somebody from behind, they are coming off, and you're just going through.
Especially if you've got a Mosler.
How much power do you need on digital to run magnet?
How much power?
Yeah, because I would think that a magnet car draws higher amperage than a non-magnet car. Now we're talking about slotted type cars.
A standard scale-electric motor will draw less than 1 amp on full acceleration without magnets. With magnets, it draws nearer 2 amps.
I can't think I could do that.
Power base will give you enough, as long as if of all 6 cars. The biggest problem is when you take off from the start. If all 6 cars floor it from the start, especially with more powerful motors, then the standard power base won't take it. That's why people do the power upgrade and put 15 to 20 amps into the track. And that tends to work. The thing is with a technical track, you can go around a lot quicker. Our club track, you can get around it in 5.5 seconds with a magnet slotted car, and it takes about 7 seconds to get around with non-magnet. But actually, it just means you've got to build a longer track. So, just throw the magnets away.
The truth of my answer to my own question is, the guys that I know will win in magnet and non-magnet no matter what. Just
Yeah,
that
a good racer is going to be a
Yeah.
good racer.
That's it.
Yeah, the good guys win no matter where they go, no matter what they're driving.
Exactly.
So it looks like we
That's
have
why
a
I'm
new
always close to last.
person joining us. Bernie, would you like to? I'm sorry, Bernie. Would you like to tell us about yourself?
Certainly. Thanks for having me.
Mhm.
I'm in Ohio right now. When I first started with slot cars, actually, I was a teenager about 50 years ago, and I had a HO scale slot car set. I really like motorsports in general because of watching IndyCar and Can-Am racing up at Road America, and so that interest kind of persisted for a while, but went dormant until maybe the 90s. And at that point, I started watching IndyCar and Formula One on TV. And then about 12 years ago, my wife bought me a Carrera Pro X digital set. And as you know, that's now no longer, it's been discontinued, but the pieces still worked. And played with it for a while and put it away in a box and forgot about it until about a year and a half ago. I made the mistake of opening it back up, buying some more digital pieces, expanding again and again, and now I've got an 80-foot track and 40 some cars, and it's a habit I can't break.
It tends to be.
Right.
Once the bug bit you, you're bitten. Whether you take a break or not, you're coming back to it sooner or later.
Right.
I wanted to read. Slothead posted a little bit about himself because he doesn't have a working microphone. He said, "Slothead, aka Joe, watching and listening from a desktop PC hooked up to my flat screen TV. That's cool. No camera or microphone, but love being a spectator. I'm now a solo racer who does simulated races based on lap times using a program I wrote. Can race 20 of my ready-to-run cars at a time for up to 100 laps. In retirement, being track manager and promoter is now my activity." That's cool. Too much fun to call a job. Isn't that what we all want? Is something that, that you can do and have so much fun that you don't consider it a job. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Joe Slothead. And thanks for joining, Bernie. Let me just look at some more chat stuff here. Looks like Andy is chatting with Lance. Lance, you were showing us the car a couple of times. That looked like a DTM, or was it like a Mercedes or
Touring car, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a touring car of
BT
some sort. Oh, BMW.
It's a Ninko M3.
Ninko M3.
Yep.
Yep, but he's got a nice potted chassis on there.
Ah,
Yeah, I don't see any magnets. No magnets. Is that for a proxy? Awesome. So I think, is that a worldwide touring car proxy? Or, yeah, you're going to have to put that in the chat. I can't read lips. Ninko BMW M3.
Guys, are you all seeing everybody else, or are you just seeing yourself and the talker?
It depends on how you choose to view. Up in the top right corner, you can choose between who speaks, called speaker view, or gallery view. If you're on speaker view, just click that little grid of squares and it'll switch you to gallery view.
Yeah, just done that now. Now that's better.
Everybody who's got a
I've
camera
not
you
got
can
that.
see at once. If they don't have a camera, they just, depending on what your settings are, like I turned off visibility for people without a camera, so you don't have a bunch of empty squares like you might have seen in previous videos. But you might be seeing empty squares when people without cameras speak. When somebody shows something up on the screen, I like to switch to speaker view for the recording, so that when somebody's showing something off, they're filling the screen. And looks like Lance answered, finding compatible wheelbase and body post position is hardest part. So touring car proxy will be in Australian tracks this year by Sport Racer. Is Sport Racer the person who's running the proxy? Okay.
Yeah,
So
he
you'll
is.
probably
Yeah.
find more on OSLOT about that, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I'm going to be having a crack at that one too.
Oh yeah, when does the proxy start?
Not real sure yet with all the
Oh,
COVID thing
okay.
that's going on, of course.
Still up
But,
in the air.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've just sent a little Revell Cortina over, posted it yesterday to the States for the under 2 litre touring Trans Am proxy, which is pretty much turned into a Porsche 9146 proxy. From the 30 entrants, there's 15 of them.
So Lance, are you sending multiple cars to the same proxy? Maybe trying to decide which one you're going to send in so far. Ooh, look at that fancy purple chat.
Oh, look at that. Oh, I'm going to have to step up my game here.
Yeah.
The Shark 20. Orange label. Shark 20,000.
22. Yeah, I think it's 23K limit, isn't it, Lance? Yeah, that's
Shark
a 22.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a 23K motor limit.
Yeah. This is Shark 22.
I was gonna say, what are the limitations? Or it's not unlimited, obviously. So just Shark.
No,
23K is the
23K, and I think you can have any chassis. It just has to have 4 doors, basically. Most of the slotted DTM cars qualify. I think it's post 1990 touring cars.
So pretty wide open, except for.
I guess
Yeah.
not the Calibra, though.
What was that, Anthony?
Not the Calibra. Calibra, I thought Calibra is a 2-door.
Oh, it's eligible then. So.
Oh, is it? I thought I heard you say 4-door.
Yeah, I thought it was 4-door, but
No, the Calibra is the real car's a 2-door.
2-door, yeah.
4-door.
The M3 is a 2-door because Lance is showing us right now.
Yeah, so 2-door.
There must be slightly flexible approach.
Yeah.
So it sounds like pretty much any late model touring car,
sedans.
but just
all the current British touring car Scalextric's bodies are eligible. So I don't know whether the Honda is. I'm going to put an BMW MG M6 with a 3D printed chassis.
Did they put a limitation on tires or anything like that? Is it going to be like wood tracks?
I think
or
it's
tracks or
it's
tracks?
mostly wood. I think a couple of plastic tracks, but I think it's mostly urethanes, isn't it? Yeah.
Wayne, the MG6 is quite a difficult car to set up compared to the rest of the Scalextric cars. But
I
one
had
thing
horrendous time with it.
Yeah, it's tricky. If you take the interior out and replace it with a Lexan interior, if that's allowed, that's the number one thing you can do with that car. Because the interior is just so big that it weighs so much and it really upsets the body handling.
Yeah, it was shocking. I loved the body shape of that when we raced the British Touring Car Series at the track I have, and it was horrendous. I just could not get it to work at all. So I binned it and got the Passat, and it's great.
Yeah, the Passate's got a little bit of a lower roof line, so it's the CRG is not so bad. But yeah, if you can fit a Lexan interior to your MG, he'll go a whole lot better.
Yeah, I think we can, so I better look at that.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's a pretty wide open proxy. Just a motor limitation and a tire type limitation. That's
no real
wide open.
No real fixed tire.
No. So Wayne,
go ahead,
out
Richard.
of curiosity, is it a motor RPM limit or is it a motor power limit?
No, RPM.
So you can put a boxer with 500 grams torque into it.
Yeah. Well, I've actually got the MG set. I've got it set up with an angle winder and a NSR Baby King in it.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Well, you could put a scale auto 21K with about 400 GCM downforce and about 23 watts in there.
Oh, I've got one of them sitting there, so I might try that.
It's my one of my constant frustrations with slot racing is people use RPM to determine motors for different classes of racing and events instead of power. And you got some cars, say in small sports car from the 50s and 60s, that can only take a FF50 pencil, and then some other cars got a boxer 21K in it with about 10 times the wattage.
Yes.
When like I mentioned, I've only done proxy racing a couple of times. I participated as a competitor and a host for the super little open proxy, which was a proxy where all the participants were encouraged to make a routed track on a 2x4 sheet of MDF. So it's a very small track. So that's why it's called little, super little. And the cars had to also be very small. They had to fit inside a box. So basically like a classic Scalextric Mini was like normal size, kind of big. In fact, I modified a Scalextric Fiat 500 Cinquecento for my car. And it was open because there were literally no limitations or rules on how you could set up or build your car whatsoever, other than it had to fit in the little box. If your car fits in the box, it passes. If it doesn't fit in the box, it doesn't pass. So that was a lot of fun because everybody made their tracks and they showed off their tracks. I did kind of like an IROC kind of arena track that did kind of loop back on itself and crisscross and stuff. And then for my car, I think I put some NSR tires on. I put a Baby King in it and just a massive slab of lead down on the bottom because all the tracks were, of course, magless because they had to be a routed track. There were no plastic tracks with steel rails in them. And most of the people were gonna, paint them with, your regular old latex interior, emulsion type paint for the surface. And so that was a lot of fun, but that was an entirely open type of proxy. And I've also participated as a host as well for a Carrera digital proxy. And that was basically box stock Carrera GT cars, no magnet with, I think, urethane tires, or maybe the tires were open. But otherwise it was pretty much, it had to be a box stock car. You couldn't do anything to it other than tire, glue and true kind of thing to the tires. And that's a Hornby Scalextric inline, so that's a newer model. Oh, is that their new BTCC, one of their BTCC cars?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some chat in the text, Greg, about it.
The VW Passat for the quick slick on tire proxy. This proxy is mostly box stock minus magnet. They provide silicone tires, and it's being run on Home Racing World. And looks like Slothead also said, I assume most everyone here is into road course racing. This is correct. I got back into slots 15 years ago to recreate dirt track oval racing. I love following when I lived in upstate New York, now Maine, and have an oval and a road course in the heated barn loft and use both. I've done some oval racing, and it is challenging in how different it is from road course racing, because you can actually get dizzy depending on how big the oval is, because you're just watching the car go round and round, and you really get into a rhythm with that. If your rhythm isn't perfect, you're gonna fail. And that was another proxy I did as a driver, so I didn't actually participate in there other than the host had, I was one of the people that came to the host track to help drive the cars. And this is the point that I was wanting to get to earlier, and I've been long-winded about it. And that proxy, creating a car for proxy racing, it seems to me, or I believe, that the ideal car is not necessarily the fastest, highest speed car or the torquiest car, but the most forgiving car, the easiest to drive car. It needs to be fast in order so it doesn't fall behind, and it needs to be quick so it doesn't, fall behind on the straightaways and stuff like that. But if your car is twitchy or, shudders or whatever, it's just going to fall behind no matter how good your drivers are. And you got to remember that your car is oftentimes going to a track where the people who are racing your car might know the track pretty well, but they don't know your car at all. And so, to put a really hot car and possibly a very new driver, a lot of times the proxies can't get a bunch of the best drivers from the local area or a club or whatever. So you take whoever you can get in order to put some fingers on triggers to get the cars going around. So you might have a guy who's been racing for 20 years next to a guy who just joined a couple of months ago. So if your car is not easy for even a new guy to kind of keep it in the slot, then it's just going to keep falling down until you get to another track where you do have, 4 or 6 or 8 of the best racers, driving your car around that can handle anything.
Yeah.
And one of the other,
I agree, Greg. I always used to put an extra tooth on the pinion when I built a proxy car because it would just take away a bit of that edge, just make the car a bit softer. And then I figured if the car did end up in the hands of a really good driver, they'd benefit from the extra top end as well because they'd drive it properly in the first place. So that was something I've built 2 or 3 maybe proxy cars, but I've driven a bunch of proxies like as a driver on hand. And I agree, you're right. The handling and the sort of forgiveness is what makes the better cars. But yeah, I always used to stick an extra tooth on the pinion so they were just a bit more mellow.
yeah, take the edge off so even though if you put a really fast or powerful motor in there, it's not such a twitchy car.
I think that the proxies that I've been in and club racing and the commercial racing that I've been involved in, I think invariably a slower motor, a less powerful motor makes a better all-around car, specifically for proxy racing, because to your point, you're trying to build the car for the worst driver in the series. So if you build a missile, again, that's twitchy and they can't keep it on the track, it doesn't matter how bloody fast the car goes.
Yeah.
And that's been proven proxy after proxy. I mean, in our local clubs, initially everybody wants motor, and we've got, 60 and 70 foot tracks with 12 to 14 foot long straightaways. You don't, geared properly, a scaly motor or a 23,000 RPM motor, you can get it to max out 3/4 of the way down the straight. It's still got lots of brakes. And when we have run series and mandated slower motors, we run an open slot class at a lot of the clubs, and we also run on a 1.5 liter Formula One car. 1.5 liter Formula One car has a 14,000 RPM BWA motor and 7 millimeter rear tires, wide rear tires. And they are about 1/10 of a second slower than the slotted cars on the track, only because they're so much more, so much easier to drive. Many guys with high-powered cars come out of a corner and they get big tank slappers so that the car slides left, the car slides right for a few tenths of a second before it hooks up, and the poor little thing that's got a 14,000 RPM motor is halfway down the straight at the end. So, and the other thing for Wayne and a few other guys, for wood track racing for proxies, I would strongly advise against using any FK180, any kind of a long can motor where the advantage of the magnets are not valuable at all on a wood track. Just what you've got is an FK180 weighs about 12 to 13 grams more than a typical S can. So when you stick it at the back of the chassis in an angle winder configuration, you've just got this great big polar moment of inertia. It's like the old Porsche 911s. I don't know if you guys have ever driven them. When they had the motor behind the rear axle, once the car was out of shape, you were totally screwed. You weren't getting it back. Now that they've moved the motor, all of a sudden the car is more predictable. So there is nothing at all wrong on wood tracks. A much better idea, in my opinion, to use a typical S-can rather than a great big chunk of lead at the back of the big heavy hunk of motor at the back of the car.
I've got a Scale Auto Tech 1 motor here. It's an S-can. It's got 20,000 RPM at 12 volts and 216 grams of torque, which is bucket loads of torque. It's about equivalent to.
What motor is that, Richard?
It's a Scale Auto Tech 1, they call it.
Yeah.
There it is there.
Yeah.
20K at 12 volts or 24,000 at 15 volts. But at 216 grams of torque, which is about roughly twice as much as a standard scale electric motor. And about the same as the motor that comes in the racer sideways.
Yeah, similar torque to a flat 6, but it's also about the same torque as a a Shark 20 or 22. There's not a lot of difference. They're up close to the 200 GCM.
Yeah.
And that's more than enough for most tracks. I say it's very easy to overpower. It's a question I was going to have for Wayne with your proxy races. Do you get sight of the tracks before you decide how to build your car? Because I guess you do need to. There are going to be some tracks that are going to be undrivable with a big motor, and it's how do you strike the balance?
Yeah, most of the guys put up a photo of the track, so you get some sort of idea as to if it's a technical one or a fast one. Yeah, I think with one of the other proxies, I think is, I can't remember what they call that one. I think he's got the touring car one's got that motor limit. There's one with an 18K limit as well that we're doing. Is that the New Zealand one that Mark
Yeah,
might
that's
remember that?
the ATCC. That's
the one, yeah.
He's running
That's
for
it,
my
yeah.
club.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think
Sorry.
go ahead.
Yeah, I think that generally you do get pictures of all the tracks. There's a few things you need to look for. You need to look at the balance of tracks with tape versus the balance of tracks with braid, because braid normally has a 5 to a 10 thou recess, where tape has a 5 to a 10 thou, it's proud of the track. So when you're setting up your cars, I mean, the whole thing with slot racing is I look at the tracks and go, well, my car is probably not going to do well on this track because it's not geared properly, or it's not this, or it's not that. But on 6 out of the 10 tracks, it'll be fine. So it's not only the track surface and the configuration of the track, but you really need all the little things. Where do I set the ride height? Because on one track I've got a 10 thou braid recess, and on the next track I'm 5 thou proud because it's tape. So there's all kind of little innuendo type things that you really need to do to set up the car for the track. And at the end of the day, it's a crapshoot, excuse my language. I mean, you build your car and you go, well, it's right down the middle in terms of gear ratio, in terms of weight, in terms of ride height, in terms of this and in terms of that, and you mail it off and pray.
Cross your fingers.
Yeah. Do sprung guides get over that ride height problem, or do they present their own issues?
No, you don't. A sprung guide is acceptable on a plastic track that's rough and has, if it's a rough track with inconsistencies where the track joins are and the rail heights, it's not bad. Anytime you have a sprung guide, the weight of the front end of depending on where the spring is and how much vertical movement you've got on the guide, you're not putting the full weight of the car on the guide, holding the guide into the track, holding the braid onto the rails, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll never see in higher forms of racing, if you will, sprung guides. It just does not exist. Okay, if you've got, and again, all these differences are small. If you switched one on a plastic track, you may or may not notice a difference, but on a wood track, do not put a sprung guide in and think you've come up with a really intelligent idea. It's not a good thing to do.
That's mainly because you want as much of the front weight of the car to be holding that guide down and the braid to the rails, to the
right. I mean, the guide is your steering. I mean, if you can't keep the guide in the slot, you don't get power, you don't get handling. Everything starts in a slot car at the front of the car with the guide and the ride height. So if you've got a car that weighs 60, 80, 200 grams, whatever it weighs, a good portion of that weight should be utilized to keep the guide in the slot. You see, and that goes on to chassis designs. You see, drop arms were not a bad idea in the early 60s, but by 66, 67, 68, there was no pro car in the world that ran with a drop arm. ISO chassis where the front whole wheel assembly can move up and down freely. You're not using the weight of that assembly to hold the front wheels on the car. And that is critical on 32nd scale cars because of the dimensions of the car, number one, and the relatively hard tires that we all use. And when I'm saying hard, I'm comparing silicone, urethane, and rubber to sponge tires. So sponge tires, the outside tire will compress in a corner and compensate. The front wheels don't really have to act as outriggers, but in a 32nd scale, because of dimensions and hard tires, you need the front wheels, the front tires to act as outriggers for stability. So on an ISO chassis that lets the front wheels rise, the car will roll into the corner, the rear tire will not compress, so the other rear tire lifts off the track, and now you've got all kinds of handling issues and traction issues and all, just a big mess.
Yeah, my experience definitely supports that. And when we're running NSRs or Slottits or something like that, if the NSRs especially, they come just flopping around.
I mean, years ago it was cool. We used to have, at the commercial tracks, you'd have drop arms. They made cars. Like there was a thing called a little red wagon years ago, and it would do wheelies all the way down the straightaway, and it would, it looked cool. But come the corners, look out! It's not going around the corners.
Isn't it also because they designed tracks with bumps in them?
Sorry?
They designed tracks with bumps in them.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think that the drop arm was so popular then.
Well,
whereas today tracks are just flat. Can you imagine putting a wing car over a bump?
Okay, but if you have a car that weighs 60 grams and a drop arm that weighs 20 grams, wouldn't you really want the whole 60 grams of the car holding the car onto the track?
100%.
Right. So drop arms were gone in 67.
So why do NSR still make a drop arm?
Stick tracks.
Because there's a whole bunch of things. Probably my best buddy is Ernie Mazzetti from MR Slot Car. And he has, a front suspension that you can alter camber on and stuff like that. But with hard rubber tires, it makes no practical sense whatsoever. So there's a lot of stuff out there that is marketed for marketing reasons.
Well, I've got to disagree. I say that the rationale is plastic tracks, yeah? If you look at a track like Ninko, which has been, okay, it's sort of fading away now and is no longer made anymore, but if we look at the last 10 or 15 years or so, I think it's reasonably easy to argue that Ninko was the predominant competitive surface over, say, Scalextric or Carrera or SCX track. And one thing Ninko track is quite bumpy. So, Richard, to address your point earlier when we were talking about sprung guides, one of the chief proponents of sprung guides were Ninko. So perhaps we can take from that they even recognised their own track was too bumpy to race on without a sprung guide. And then if you look at NSR's design philosophy, NSR's design is all around plastic track racing. Now, yeah, sure, they go well on wood as well, but, you have to tune them and they're a bit inconsistent from time to time on wood. But, an NSR car is designed to tear it up on a plastic track, which it absolutely does.
And there is a hole to screw it rigid for wooden tracks anyway. So I think about my Corvette. There's a specific. It comes with the drop arm screwed rigid when it comes in the box.
Yes, and also NSR have recently stopped shipping the new models. Haven't got drop arms.
Yeah, they've realised the error of their ways after all these years.
Yeah, but, the AMG GP3s, for example. But I've got an example right here of an Inco drop arm in a Scalextrics. And this is because it's my World Rally proxy. Now this is going to go around and it's going to be bumping over solder on copper and, all sorts of stuff. So this is about the only time you do use a Ninko sprung guide. And what you do is just chop the spring in half, so you do get some weight, but you also get compensation. One of my tracks, if you try to go around it without a sprung guide, you wouldn't do a lap.
But for rallying, it does make a lot of sense.
God,
Martin, have you tried winding your own springs?
No.
It's actually quite easy to do. You just buy harpsichord wire.
I just hate looking on the carpet for things I've sprung off me. I should buy like a white carpet for my slot toy car room, shouldn't I? So to see stuff.
Yeah, I had a few Ninko rally cars, and I couldn't get springs of them for love nor money. I ended up buying some of the thinnest gauge harpsichord wire and winding it round a wire nail, and then you can cut it to length. It actually works just as well as the original Ninko guide.
I'll go steal some wire from my harpsichord.
There you go.
Are we going to have a live harpsichord stream, Greg?
Yeah.
What was that?
You can get a wire, but harpsichord sounds cooler.
Yeah, I'll just nick some off my wife's G string. She won't notice. On a harpsichord.
Just don't use the underwire.
I was just about to say, what's that?
Oh, there we are. It's taken an hour, but you found the level.
That's gauge 20. That stuff, guys.
Gary, you just mentioned that Ninko was no longer made. Maybe you've heard something in the last 3 or 4 months I haven't, but I was at the head office in October, and they had a 2020 production schedule with 2 new sets in it. So I presume they were still producing track in Alicante.
I hadn't heard that they're making any track in Spain, so I'll defer to your experience.
Oh well, hey, I could be out of date, but I went and saw Mark Figgles and Charlie in October when we were back in Spain, and they had a limited range with the universal chassis, the Lexan bodies and stuff, but they did have 2 new sets coming out for 2020. So I presume they were still doing some production down at the plastics factory.
Or shifting old stock.
Yeah, or they've got a pile of it.
Well, they're new sets and new boxes, so...
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Richard. I think that's more likely.
You
unless we
put
get
all
news that
tracks in
they're
the box.
selling R4s and R3s and all the specialist pieces as well, which I would be happy about. I would, at the moment, take the view that they're still trying to shift their old inventory in terms of box sets with normal straights and R2s in it. But
yeah, it's easy to print a new box, dress it up something new, and just shift your old stock.
I remember you saying that, Mark, before Christmas. I remember reading that somewhere.
Yeah, I put out a list from the 2020 143rd and 132nd scheduling. And they were fairly open with what they were and weren't going to be doing. The WRC licensing expires, I think, June this year. So the 143rd sets they had been doing under WRC were just going to revert to Ninko brand. But there were, it was all really the toy store market based focus. And yeah, as Gary says, there was only R2s, full straights, half straights in the sets. But I thought there was at least some life left in it. COVID may have killed that off, of course, because their strongest market was Spain. And Ninko's a tiny amount of the overall group these days anyway. When you go into the head office, you go past about the length of 2 city blocks on the left-hand side, which they say, that's the cardboard factory. That's where they make jigsaw puzzles and games and things. And, it's massive. And the showroom is a little tiny corner that has RC in it. And within the RC, there's a little tiny corner that has slop in it.
Isn't Polycar track a decent substitute for Ninko, Gary?
I'm the wrong person to give you a positive opinion on Polycar, Richard. So I'm going to save my face and say nothing else than it's not my preference.
Oh, okay.
I don't see any reason not to tell people why. I mean, I assume that's because you said that you...
Because I'm very good friends with Mr. Ferrari and I don't want to upset him.
Mr. Ferrari is probably the best person on the internet as far as taking constructive criticism of things. unlike some people on the internet. So I have
Look,
no
I
problem
mean,
telling Maurizio when I have a problem with his product.
I'm in this. I reckon I'm in a very small minority of people that will have this opinion anyway. Because when we all raced on it in Barcelona, everybody loved it. But I don't like the way it looks, which I know has nothing to do with how it performs. But I find the surface pattern is just too weird.
Yeah,
it is weird.
It's like crazy paving, but it's not. It's
an optical illusion.
It's odd to behold. Yeah. But ignoring that. It's too easy, Richard. It's too easy to drive on. It doesn't punish you if you make a mistake. And I, without blowing my own trumpet, I'm a pretty good driver, right? Especially on plastic. And it's just too easy. It's like a Formula One track with tarmac runoffs. That's exactly what I thought when I was driving it.
Ninko.
No, Ninko absolutely breaks your balls if you make a small mistake on it, and it will have your car out in an instant.
So you're not talking about traction, you're talking about just overall.
Yeah. I mean, the grip's fine. We've run the same car setups we've run on Ninko in terms of tyres and things like that. The polycar rail is lower, so people were finding that they'd lost a bit of downforce from their motors and things like that, which is all fine. It was a first competitive run out on that track, so there was bound to be some teething issues. But I just couldn't get over that. The car, I felt like the car was driving itself around that course, and it obviously wasn't. But it's just too easy for me to drive on. And
you're quite unusual, Gary. You actually treat Ninko track properly. You don't get bend ups here. You take your Ninko track apart correctly. I've seen the way you handle it. Now I've been to clubs with people like Keith at Hereford, and his track is like that because they just rip it apart and they just pull it apart. And they don't take care of their track. Now, I think the polycar will survive that far more because it's a very flat. You just pull it apart and push it together. I think that's where it's a winner. And we're running out a new new Ninko track, which is a problem. In the UK, I don't know if you guys are aware, but the majority of club tracks are, or the majority of plastic club tracks are Ninko anyway. But it's been abused for too long.
I'd say they were.
Drive properly. You want to get a track with sport. That punishes you because the Ninko is just so grippy. It's like driving on sandpaper.
No. I try to explain to people, Scaly Sport is like Aperol Spritzer. That's for kids. And Campari is for grown-ups with Ninko track.
Sorry, mate. I don't like you.
I sold all my Scaly Sport to you, Rich.
Yeah, and we're still using it on the club track. I must admit, however people knock manufacturers, the best tyres to use on Scalextric Sport track are Scalextric tyres, especially the sport tyres, because they actually do work well because they obviously designed them to work on. They didn't take any notice of the rest of the world. The thing is, I'm fairly sanguine about track surfaces because it's the same for every racer on that track, especially when you're racing digital. You're all racing on exactly the same track for most of the time. You find the fastest lane and you stick on it, and everybody's stuck with it. People moan about, there's a bump in the track there. Yeah, but everybody's got that bump to contend with. And it's more down to how well you prep your cars. And I think, I don't know, personally, I like a technical track because it's so easy to overpower a car. We have some classes in our club where there's one particular class, you have a certain wheel and a certain tyre. I provide the control tyres that I make, and we have alloy wheels from Pendles. Everybody has the same wheels and tyres. Apart from that, you can do what you like. And most of the winning cars are running 20k motors with about 120 grams of torque. If you try and run 25k around our hairpins, you're off. It's just uncontrollable. So although it's unlimited, it forces people to experiment and find the right medium. And it's about that controllability. We're finding that the Racer Sideways cars are actually as fast as the NSR cars with another 120 grams of torque because they're undrivable on our track. So a moderate motor does a lot better because it's more controllable in the mid-range. That's what I quite like about the challenge is that, especially as we race the same track but with different classes, it's about finding that right middle ground. People come along with 30k motors, then we laugh at them because they can't make it round a lap without coming off.
How do you guys actually measure torque?
That's why I asked the question about do you see the tracks, because it's about finding that happy medium, isn't it?
Sorry, how do you guys actually measure torque?
Do you guys measure torque or just go by whatever the manufacturer puts on or spec'd out for the motor?
Yeah, well, it's an indicator on the motor, isn't it? What they've spec'd out, but it's when you power out of the R4 entry to your long straight, the torque will soon tell you how much is there, because your acceleration point will change. There's some, the really overpowered ones, you have to wait until you're running straight before you can put any power on. Others, you can actually feed it in 2 or 3 track pieces before you hit the straight. And too much torque just gives you so much sideways action that sometimes actually having a longer gearing or less powerful motor will actually give you a smoother drive. And as you know, if you're sliding, you're losing time.
Yeah, so I don't think anybody's like, well, I mean, I know people who actually do torque measurements. I remember there was a pretty lengthy thread on, I think it was Slot Forum, could have been Slot Car Illustrated, where they were taking measurements of like every slot car motor that they could find. The RPMs and torque especially was important to them, and they were doing all kinds of, putting a lever onto the axle, and seeing how much it pushes down on a scale or something like that. They're doing all kinds of ways to measure it to see how closely it matched what the manufacturer was saying. What these things happen.
That's Slot Car News, I think, isn't it? There's
they could have been referencing that, yeah.
Yeah, slotcarnews.blogspot.com. They tested hundreds of motors, and they show you the jig they got set up to check the torque.
Okay.
So yeah, I tend to refer to that, and most manufacturers aren't far off, but they are off.
And that's going to be manufacturing tolerances most of the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, let the experts do the measuring.
That question on Carrera motors.
You go back.
Hold on, Bernie, go ahead.
I'm sorry. On Carrera motors, do they actually print the specs on the motor itself? I can't say I've seen it, and I'm not sure how much they really have in terms of RPM.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen printed specs on most Carrera motors. Are pretty much label-less, and they just kind of have a big batch of motors that they're all spec the same. Between all their 132 motors are the same motors, and all their 124 motors are the same motors. They're not especially powerful. They're all the Carrera cars that I have. In spite of them being heavy cars to begin with, the motors are not torquey motors, and then they're all set up as inline, which doesn't give you as much braking power as it would if it were an ankle winder or a sidewinder. So they're basically eliminating or not making use of the available torque in their car design in the first place, and then their motors aren't especially torquey to begin with. So Carrera cars tend to be not hot off the line and tend to be under brake. But that's just from personal experience. I don't know what they're rated at. Does anybody know what a typical Carrera motor is going to be rated at?
Carrera E200, which is the one that's running in most of their current cars, is it's tested. It was supposed to be 21,000 RPM. It's been tested between 18 and 20 and a half, and it's about 96 centimeters of torque at 12 volts, which is actually 10 less than the standard Scalextric Mabuchi. So they are fairly gutless, actually, which is a shame because the chassis are good and they could take a lot more power.
Right. When I first got into the hobby, I never much paid attention to the specs, and then when I started joining in the club racing, you find out right away Carrera cars just aren't competitive. Right. Because of the underpower, the weight, all that. I mean, they look really nice, but I've found I've had to go to different cars. And again, I've only been in the hobby for less than 2 years and just beginning to get a sense of how to tune cars and what to do. So it's a real learning curve I'm still on.
The other thing, Bernie, about Carrera cars is that they have much more powerful magnets because Carrera track is usually stainless steel, so there's less magnetic attraction. So when you put a Carrera car on Scalextric Sport, you're getting way more downforce than Carrera intended, which means that the motors seem even less powerful. So the first thing to do when you're running your Carrera car on Scalextric Sport is take one of the magnets out.
Right.
Yeah, I unboxed a Carrera car the other day, Richard, and I was amazed that it had 4 magnets inside it.
Yeah, and they're massive.
2 at the front and 2 at the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, our
Amazing they move on
requires
sport track at all.
Our
You used
club
to be able to
racing said
move the magnets along the length of the car, and then it would raise it away from the rails.
Right.
They don't make them like that anymore.
When you look at the NASCARs, you know the big, you know the Plymouth, the big Plymouth with the big tail on the back. They had a strange arrangement where there was actually a magnet on a sliding bar attached to the end of the overlong guide, and so the magnet would follow the end of the guide to drag the guide down into the slot.
I had one of those. That was a pain to digitize.
Yeah, and you couldn't put it on a Scalextric track because the guide blade was literally about 35 millimeters long.
Yeah, it got chopped up quite a bit.
Crazy.
Bernie, I'm curious. You said you've been racing with the club for a couple of years, and the Carrera cars aren't competitive. Does that mean that you guys are on what you brought to the club, or do you have races where you all race the same kind of car, or you're actually putting Carrera cars up against slotted cars and things like that?
Well, yeah, I've been club racing for about a year, and the club basically has classes of cars that we might have Group C cars, we might have Group 5 cars, and then there's a Revo slot class. It's kind of all over the place, but you know, some people would bring a what's another class that we run? If you have a vintage class, which is really open to all kinds of things. I had a Carrera 917 Porsche, which I hadn't fully tuned yet, but you know, it's not going to be competitive with someone else who's bringing a Porsche 917 from, say, Slotted or someone else, because they're just such differently manufactured cars. For the most part, it's not run what you brung. It's usually defined by a particular kind of class, and they do have rules, which, because it ticks off so many of the people, that a lot of people quit because they don't want to adhere to the rules on tuning. But to kind of answer your question, we're in various types of classes. Anyway, I've been kind of evolving too. I discovered Thunder Slot a while ago, and I was really pleased with the performance I got out of that, because the body is really super light and the motor is, you know, fairly good, and there's so many little things I'm learning as to how to tune them and what not to mess up with them.
I've never had a car go so fast, literally straight out of the box. That car comes out the factory, the pod float is set, the ride height is set, unglued tires, they just, yeah, fantastic.
You know that
really good
the guy who produces that was the original technical director for NSR.
Yeah, he's the guy who designed the Mozzie, isn't he? The Mosler.
Yep.
Yeah, nice guy. I met him at Gaydon this last year.
Yeah.
And the year before, decent fella.
Used to race at Bordeaux every year.
Yeah.
Well, that explains why Thunder Slot is a great car. I don't have a Thunder Slot yet, but I've never heard a bad thing about them. So I guess I need to get one. Coming from my club, over the years, you know, at first I would buy every kind of car, right? Just, oh, that looks a great car, I'll buy that. But now it's come to the point where I have enough cars that I just bought because I like them. So I tend to just buy cars that the club is going to race. And my club, our series are based on type of car, like Group C's or Group 5 or you know, Le Mans Classic or, you know, GT or whatever like that. But we also understand that different manufacturers are not really competitive with one another. So it'll be NSR Modern GT. It'll be Slotted Group C or Sideways Group 5, right? So everybody's running the same manufacturer
Yeah.
We've got different bodies, and of course the bodies have slightly different chassis, and those obviously have an effect. So, for example, we did a slotted classic DTM because they started coming out with those cars, and of course, the Calibra and other low wide cars were the car to get. You're not going to race it with one of those Alphas. You're just not going to compete, even though everything else is the same. The Alphas are narrow and tall, and the Calibras are low and wide. So it's hard for me to kind of fathom why a club would even say, okay, just bring any group C car you want. So you got some guys in there with your slotted and whatnot, and then some guys bring in a Carrera or an old Scalextric or something like that, and but I can see why some guys would not want to be told that they can't bring in their really nice NSR or slotted or whatever. But at the same time, you don't want new guys to be coming in and they bring in their Carrera and they're getting smoked by all the guys with other cars, and they're like, well, the only way I could possibly stay with this club and feel like I have any kind of chance is if I go spend money on these fancy cars. And then those guys with those cars tend to also be the guys who will replace the motors and the gears and the wheels and the tires and suspension and all this stuff. They've put more money in parts into a car that was perfectly fine before they replaced most of the parts, and then you've got the new guy going, okay, I've got to spend $80 on a brand new car and then another $80 on all the parts that I'm putting in order to be competitive. So I can see how that kind of situation could be both empowering for some and frustrating for others. So it's tough to have a club that goes a long time without some kind of drama of some sort. And
it is a big issue. We had that problem with our club, is that having been to some analog clubs where they're racing 10, 12 different classes and people are spending 100, 150 pounds per car, it puts an almost insurmountable financial barrier to somebody joining in. So we decided right from the start, we're going to run 4 classes a year, and every year we're going to change 2 classes. So anybody who's coming in, and most of the time we set a limit of around about 30 to 35 pounds, so 35 to 40 US dollars per car. And then we have one tuning class where you can go up to about 60 pounds or 70, $75. So it's not too much of a, and then when next year we'll keep 2 classes and we'll replace 2 classes. So each year you're only looking at maybe, under a couple of $100, if you like, to stay in the game. Otherwise, if people come along and they've got to spend 500, 600 just to get kitted up, it scares people away right from the start. And there's not, it's only us oldies that are racing anyway. You're never going to get
Speak for yourself.
Well, yeah. Well, it's difficult to get to get people to join the club as it is, let alone putting a massive financial barrier in the way. And you can have just as much fun racing a Scalextric's BTCC car as you can racing, an NSR or a Slotted, providing you keep the performance level. So an open class, yes, we can change anything. Then you can if you're a bit of a wizard, you can make any make of car go fairly fast. But most of the time, we're running BTCC Scalextrics as one class, box standard, take the magnet out. We're running small wheelers, classic sort of Escorts and Datsuns and so on as our tuning class this year. Last year it was LMPs. We're running Carrera classics, so any Carrera car from the 50s or the 60s is another class. And we try to do it so the lap times are different. So our classes tend to be 7-second laps, 8-second laps, 9-second laps, and 10-second laps. So we try and find deliberately crappy cars. There's a bit of a challenge, so they'll go around slow, but everybody's falling off at the same corners until you get used to it. And then the super fast cars that make you feel like you've been in a fight with Mike Tyson after you've done 15-minute heat.
Yeah, a lot of clubs fall down with that, but I've always said, I turn up for, classic class. Tends to be, at the moment, Thunder Slots are ruling the roost there. It was 917s when I started, then it was P68s, then I went to Thunder Slots. I'm turning up with enough cars in my pit box for a new guy to borrow 1, 2, or 3 cars off me, plus the other guys. Plus, we got spare controllers. So I always think you should always try and spend a year lending kit to people until they bit by bit build up their portfolio.
Yeah, we do that, but then when they
But-
commit, then there's a big spend.
It's up to them to buy them. But
Yeah.
still don't stop me buying like tons of crap I don't really need every year. But it's just it keeps me on the pub, is what the wife says. So
It's cheaper than playing golf, Martin. A lot cheaper than
Oh,
playing golf. That's what I keep
God,
saying
yeah.
to my missus.
yeah, because my missus would take tenner off me every round. She's a bloody brilliant golfer.
We do look for bargains. I mean, Gaydon unfortunately isn't on this year, but Gaydon is our normal thing. We'll go to the slot festival in May with half a mind to what we're going to race next year. A couple of years ago, we found they were dumping a load of Racer Sideways Group 5s on the market for about £30 to £35, which is what, $35 to $45, which was it'd be rude not to buy them at that price. So we bought a load. The guys that weren't there, we messaged them on WhatsApp saying, what do you fancy? And that was a class sorted. And we had Racer Sideways all in with digital chips for about £45 each, which is
That's worth it just parts.
stunning price. Yeah, I picked up my Capri for 30 quid, which was I felt guilty paying so little for it really, but it's a brilliant car.
Well, one of the best nights racing I've ever had was at Hereford. They bought 6 Fiat Puntos, 6 Fiat 500 NSRs, painted them the colour of the lanes, and you just left the car there. And it's up to you to clean the tyres and clean the braids, and you went onto your lane. Best nights racing we used to have. Fantastic. They were all tuned within an inch of their life by some pretty handy racers, and so your skill would change from lane to lane, whereas the quality of the car, the motor, the tyres, or whatever would stay there. So that was so much fun.
How many of you guys?
Before we continue a little bit too much, I want to give Jeremy a quick moment to speak and introduce. He joined in a few minutes ago and has been patiently listening. Jeremy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi there, I'm Jeremy, born again racer on Slot Race Forum. I'm in the south of England. I race digital at Worthing HO Club. I've been there once before the shutdown. They race scale electric there. I had the privilege of having my car penalised by Gary because I turned up with a second-hand Porsche which had the black windscreen with no interior, so they don't allow that. So Gary very kindly put a 5 gram weight in there and gave me a little half-hour lesson on how to tune cars. And then I thought I was the world's greatest racer. And then I watched Gary race, and he wiped the floor of everyone. So you say these standard classes are very fair, but Gary's an exceptional racer. So I was lucky to watch that. Since then, we have a Slotted Group C car that race group that I've got a car for. We occasionally have a Goodwood classic car event, so that, again, you can spread out a little bit. But basically, they try and keep the racing at a simple level with basic cars, limited tuning with the tyres. So as time goes on during this shutdown, I keep thinking I'm the world's greatest racer, having only done it once in December last year. But I can't wait to get back now.
Sure, they'll cure you of that belief.
I know.
I did want to read. Lance made a comment that might lead it. It kind of is what we were talking about earlier. Might lead into what Bernie was about to say. He says there's a race type where the club has all the equal prepared cars and the drivers change lanes. Cars stay in lane. When I was in a club, yes, I'm running wrong type of car, but they do help you. When in this club, I'm not very competitive with the top 5. I just try to stay there and have fun. That's what my club calls IROC racing, based on the International Race of Champions, where the drivers come and they race the same cars. And oftentimes it's the host. Host provides the cars, and sometimes one of the members will bring in 4 or 6 or 8, however many is necessary for the track, cars, and then the cars stay in their lane, and everybody rotates through, and that's when you know who the better drivers are, as opposed to who the better drivers of their own cars that they tuned are. It separates the men from the boys. Bernie, did you want to talk about that kind of thing, or did you have a question about that kind of thing, or anything else?
Yeah, I'll kind of add to that line of thought. the club that I'm in, we basically have the first group of racing is analog. And then the second half is a digital race in Carrera mode. And then actually there's another club that only meets on a monthly basis, and it kind of rotates from house to house. It goes to various people. The Thursday night club is just in the shop of the guy who owns the store where we buy all our stuff. But one of the questions I was going to ask is how many guys race digital, how many guys race analog, or do you kind of do half and half of each? I've found that the digital to be a lot of fun because you can get 6 cars on the track at one time, switching lanes, you're stopping for fuel. You know, it's a whole different dimension than analog, which is just, 2 guys, and we do the round robin format where you all rotate through. But, I like the way we run it. I've had more success in the digital format, but now that I've got my own track set up after the pandemic has passed, my hope is that I'll be able to host races of my own. And when I do that, I'll probably run analog and digital, where one of the digital, I'll probably provide the 6 Formula One cars that are stock Carrera with magnets, and just so guys can all race the same thing. Our club typically doesn't do Formula One, but I happen to like that type of car. So I'm going to kind of go in that direction once we get back up and running.
I'll answer the question first, and I'm sure everybody will be happy to answer that question. I know that we have a good mix of digital and analog racers and people who race both analog and digital. I am one of those people who race both analog and digital. I started, as a kid with, toys, and then with my kids getting into it, got a digital set, but then I got interested and found an analog club. And so for the last 10 years, I've been racing weekly with an analog club that goes, rotates house to house. We got about eight or 10 people who with their own tracks. And these tend to be 4-lane analog plastic Scalextric tracks or 4-lane routed wood tracks. Blast to race with those guys. And like you said, it's a different kind of racing than digital. And because I love digital, I started a club and have a bunch of guys who race digitally. We're more spread out, so it takes longer for us to kind of get to a point where everybody can actually attend a race. So it tends to be on the bi-weekly or monthly or sometimes more than that before we can actually get together. But those are going to be 2-lane 6-car digital like Scalextric and Carrera. My home track is switchable between analog and digital. Mine's Scalextric digital, and so 2-lane analog. And I wired it up for club analog controllers. Mine is the smallest and most technical track for the analog guys, but it's about on par with the other digital tracks. So it's interesting when the analog guys come over. It's like, oh shit, Greg's house, because I got a couple of hairpin R1 turns in my track, and that'll separate the men from the boys for sure. Especially when you're side by side going through a hairpin. I learned early on to get rid of the squeeze hairpin because that was just asking for trouble. Especially with digital, you've got lane changers. You don't need squeezes and things. But that's me. I love both. They're 2 different kinds of slot racing, so they're both just as fun in their own way. I do prefer digital because, like you said, it has that extra level. Fueling, and in my case, weather and tires and other stuff that goes along with it, which is a lot of fun. And you can be an okay racer and strategize your way into the podium, whereas with analog you tend to really have to be a good racer to get to the podium for a variety of reasons. I went on quite a bit. Gary, you want to go first?
I'll race anything with 4 wheels, 1-to-1 scale.
Oh, and I did want to mention that the F1 open wheelers are not popular just in general, I've found, because as soon as those tires touch, one of those or both of those cars are disappearing off the track. And so most of the analog guys resist when we start suggesting that our next series be open wheelers, whether it's classic or modern open wheelers. but we usually manage to convince them. And then it's a whole lot of people trying to race as clean as possible.
Yeah. So, you know, I guess I have a reputation now for being Mr. Digital, but certainly when I started out in slot cars, there was really, you know, SSD was in its infancy. So it was analog or the highway. Did a lot of analog club racing and national racing. And I even did British National Analog GT3 Series last year, just because I fancied doing it again. But yeah, I'm mainly digital, I think it's fair to say. But over the years, I've done everything, you know, HO, whatever, analog, plastic, wood, magnets, non-magnets, pretty broad spectrum. The only thing I haven't tried, as Anthony mentioned earlier, is a wing car. I've never driven a wing car. I've driven metal chassis Lexan body cars, but not wing cars. So I guess that's it for me. But Richard?
Yeah, almost purely digital. Been 130 seconds Scalextric digital right from the start 8-9 years ago, with the odd foray into slot rallying. I do enjoy slot rallying, which obviously is analog against the stopwatch. And we have 3 or 4 tracks in the club, so we get them out probably once every 2 or 3 months and have a go at slot rally, just to basically give all the cars we can't afford to chip a bit of a run out on the tracks. But weekly it's digital every Tuesday night, and quarterly, you know, the odd little slot rally.
Anthony?
Me? Yes, Gary, I'm old school. Analog. I can remember having a debate with Gary a couple of years ago. No, I'm old school. I do analog. I have raced. I did buy Pro X when it came out. I had quite a big track. That was before I left South Africa and came up to Belgium. I did have quite a big track in my garage in South Africa, but it never grabbed me, to be honest with you. I do understand why people race it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not slagging off analog, digital at all. But I'm old school. I'm analog.
Martin?
Yeah, every week I race analog once a week. I really enjoy it. It's a good club where we have the 2 top guys really are good racers, and they bring us on, the Jones father and son team, and they help everybody. They even prepare tires for you if you don't have a tire trailer, for example. So every week, you know, so it's 50 weeks a year racing a Wednesday night analog track. 6, 7, or 8 of us get together and thrash it out. There's about 10 events on the weekends throughout the year, and then I do Gary's Disca events whenever I can. So I've got in with the team there, and we have great fun at those events. Each year I'm trying to get out to Eindhoven for an international. I fully intend doing Barcelona next time I can for the European events. So I'll race anything, but I also host 1 round of World Rally Proxy. So I've sort of, a club sort of folded. They lost their premises and they gave me 2 rally tracks, and I bought another one. So I got some pretty good rally tracks to muck about with. Just invested in Polycar because my Ninko track's getting old and tired, and I really like what Maurizio's done there. So just a point to note, my quick show and tell, this shirt I'm wearing, it's the NSR 24-hour from 2014, and it was the year that Salvatore Noviello died. So this is the black shirt just for that year. And I noticed, Bernie, you've got a lovely painting right behind your head. I've got an original there by a guy, he's on slot forum called Trisha, a guy by the name of Lawrence Meredith. He wrote for Motorsport for years and years, particularly wrote about at Le Mans. So he had pit passes at Le Mans for years and years. The stories that guy can tell. It's engage with Trisha on slot forum.
Why Trisha?
It's his wife's name.
Okay, it's my sister's name. And
he came on undercover because he fell out with everyone. He just fell out with everyone one day. He just had a rush of blood, and Lawrence fell out with everyone. But now he's back in with the guy. He's a really interesting character. Really, really interesting guy, Trish. Lawrence.
He's a nice guy.
Yeah. He is. He's a good guy.
Andy, do you want to take a flat stack at this one?
Yeah, I said in my introduction, we mostly do digital here at home. because with the Scalextric, you get more cars and more stuff in space. And I actually have kids come over to our house because they prefer the Scalextric. We use Arc Pro, and they prefer the app aspects of the digital here at home to their digital Carrera stuff. Probably because Carrera, their app isn't quite, even though there are lots of problems with the Scalextric app and the Magic app, it's not quite as good. But yeah, the club that I race at is purely analog. Most of them, in fact, they're like, absolutely convinced you can only have a Sidewinder brass bottom chassis. That's the only thing that will work ever. So just to make a point, like I often will throw in an inliner. I mean, like I said, I'm always defending the last or second to last pace, but just for fun. And but I'm a lot like Greg. I'll race anything with four wheels like Gary, but I'll race it extremely badly. Although I did get up to 4th place in my go-karting group, so in the standings, so that had to take a break. But yeah, so that's it's somebody mentioned, and I think it was Lance, or no, it was Slothead asked. Slot racing in Germany is very, very popular, but of course it's all Carrera. But what's surprising is a lot of it's 1/24th scale, which is a little bit. I think it was I forget his name. The guy from Toronto was talking about the differences between 1/24th and 1/32nd. I would say that's one of the things that's really surprised me, is how big of a difference it is, the 1/32nd scale to the 1/24th scale. The cars handle quite a bit differently.
Jeremy or Wayne or Kelly, do you want to talk about your, analog versus digital? Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't do analog at all. I started out with HOs like just about everybody else. I was huge in SEX digital, and looking at all the posts and everything. I recently switched over to Scalextric digital, but I haven't. I'm not in any club or anything, and just like everyone else, I race pretty much anything. The club that I did have, we did NASCAR, and so we had one class for the aero style NASCARs, and we had another class for the COT NASCARs, and that's what we raced. Just because having new people come, the bodies didn't have a lot of the accessories, the mirrors and the fins and the wings, and it didn't break. So when they flew off the track, the body was still intact. So that's what we stuck to for our club. But we also raced the GTs, the more adults, the more skilled racers. After we got done club racing, we raced those cars. And so right now, that's what I do. I'm purely digital. Nothing against analog. I'm real interested to, once all this is over with, to actually go to some of the clubs that do analog racing, and just to be a part of it. I race pretty much anything, and like Andy said, in my own club, yeah, I'm the best, but I'm working with beginners, so of course that doesn't say much. But probably racing with some of the other guys, I would probably definitely finish last, because I know nothing about tuning, I know nothing about screwing wheels and motors and specs and torques or any of that. I just take the car out of the box, put it on the track, and let's race. Let's get in and out the pits, and let's see who finishes first. That's kind of what we do. So we just do it to have fun. We don't have the type of, listen to some of you guys, where you have that one person or two people that take it to the limit. People just happy just put the car on the track and run. So that's kind of what I do.
Good. And now I realize that we haven't gotten to everybody, but we are pushing the 2-hour mark. We might be able to go beyond it. I don't know. We'll find out. But before we reach that 2 hours, did anybody have any additional show and tell or questions that have been bubbling in their head that they wanted to get some opinions on, or anything like that?
I have a quick question for Jeremy. Jeremy, it's Chris Walker calling. I want to know how many gears you have now.
Uh-oh.
I've learned lots of things. I learned lots of things from Gary about digital cars and how to prepare them. And from Chris, I've learned the golden rule that there's no such thing as an angle winder gear. Anybody who's bought an angle winder gear has been fobbed off, because Chris's rule number 1 is you use a sidewinder gear for everything. Yeah, so that rule is logged in my brain now and will forevermore.
Well, that's not so much a rule as there is absolutely zero need to run a cut gear in an angle winder. Straight cut gears have been used in angle winder configurations since the first angle winder in 1968. And there's no need to, no need to buy one.
I can't believe I bought one. I'm so embarrassed.
Well,
What's in the car?
nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with it whatsoever. But a straight cut gear is a lot more versatile because you can switch it around depending on, hub in, hub out, and all the rest of the stuff. And once set up, once you've established the right amount of lash, zero need to run a angled cut gear.
I suppose, okay, as I'm chatting now, I could ask you a million questions about that car you talked about the other day that could do 150-foot track in 1.5 seconds or whatever, and the engines cost $400.
Well, those motors are
the old days.
Around $400 US, and they need $60 rebuilds every 20 minutes.
Wing cars, cobalt motors.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so the only thing I might say is I think it was digital that got me interested in racing again after like a 40-year gap. But I drive anything, or not very much, but I want to drive anything. And our club now, during the shutdown, is organising a proxy drag strip, HO drag racing competition. So I'm now learning about HO cars and how small they are. And they're just analog, and they race for 1 second. So that's my new line of slot car racing I'm learning about.
I've got a quick question for Chris Walker, seeing he's won the last round of the GT3 proxy and I'm at the back.
Oh. So what's your question?
Tyre preparation.
Yeah.
I think that is mostly the key, because going through all the specs of those GT3 proxy cars, they're all very, very similar.
Yeah.
Apart from yours, of course, who you went with the, as you recommended, angle winder with the FC130 motor. But tyre prep is obviously the key.
What'd you do to your tires, Chris?
Tire prep is, if you took any of the top 6 cars in that series, or in most rubber tired proxy races, and just switch tires between the 1st and the 6th place car, it'd make all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Which, unfortunately, I don't like that particularly. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, or in our last chat, I have some tire manufacturers that will put a colored dot into the tire. So when I tech the cars, I know everybody's on the same tire. We don't allow the playing with them. And it takes one of the black magic voodoo things out of the equation. Earlier on, I was talking about sponge tires and how they compress, and how that's really advantageous for handling, because it'll allow the tire to compress at load and give traction. One of the big issues with the tires that we all run, rubber, silicone, urethane, they are really hard by comparison. So anything you can do to soften up a tire in its compression is a bonus. So I will use the smallest hub size that I can within the rules in any class, with a larger diameter, a larger depth tire, which adds a little bit of compression to the tire. Secondly, I run air hubs all the time. And a few years ago, the hot ticket for air hubs was you would glue the tire on both beads, and then take a syringe and put a little bit of air into the tire, which took out a little bit of the convex nature of the tire, but also gave it more compression. Well, a lot of the clubs, thank God, have outlawed that because, parents and kids are coming in and everybody's got a bloody syringe on top of their flat box. Really wasn't conducive to promoting the hobby amongst the parents and the newbie kids. So a lot of work has been looked at into how to duplicate that. And what I do is I take old 32nd or 24 scale sponge donuts, cut them into strips, glue them in the center of the ribs, put them in a tire lathe, machine them down, then melt the tire. Then it's a matter of truing, and how much gunk do you want to put on the tire? I know when I race in sprint races, I'll just soak the tires in oil because they've only got to last me 45 minutes of running, and then I can put on a new pairs of tires. But there's always a balance on a proxy race that's going to go, 6-8 months for Christ's sake, and all kinds of races. How sticky, how gooey do you want to make the tires? Or, so you do great in the first 3 races, or you don't do great in the last races. But I glue them on, I true them, I try and clean them up as much as possible, make a good round edge on either side, and then I'll go at them with a little bit of basic 3-in-1 oil. More recently, I'm using lighter fluid, or shellite, I guess, as most of you guys would know, or some of you guys would know it as. Lighter fluid's oil-based. It's a petroleum-based product, so you're using oil on the tires. I'll wipe that onto the tire, run 10 laps, wipe it on, run 10 laps, and I'll do that 20 times. I don't like it because a lot of guys, and I'll do 5 or 6 pairs of tires, all identical. And I'll do 5 sets of tires, and I'll treat them all the same, and I'll true them all the same, and I'll put them on the car, and there'll be 2/10 difference between the best ones and the worst ones. Now, I like playing with, I don't mind putting in that effort. I like to win races as opposed to be a participant. So the effort to me is not an effort, but for the good of the hobby and for your average guy, it's a huge pain in the ass. And it's a deterrent because I tell guys, okay, they'll come into my workshop and I'll go, yeah, these are the 10 pairs of tires I prepared for this proxy. 10. Well, that's 100 pounds worth of wheels. That's 100 pounds or whatever it is for 10 pairs of tires, gluing and time and all the rest. I'm only going to use one. I'm going to throw the others in the garbage. So I would much prefer either non-treated tires or urethanes or something, but it is what it is. And sometimes I got these tires right. Last year, the GT3 proxy was the Group 5 proxy, and I didn't get my tires right. So I was in, 2nd, 3rd, 4th place most of the year. So there's no science to it. There is to a point, but it's more of a black art. And then every pair of NSR tires you use, they're not all the same. They're made in small batches that they're like cookies. So, today's batch is good, tomorrow's batch is not so good. And I don't think it's good for the hobby, but that's beside the point.
That's exactly why I don't race on wood anymore, for every reason you've just said.
The guys that I race with now, when I was racing wing cars and I was going to the States and I was going to here and I was going to Helsinki and wherever we were going for the world, everybody knew what the deal was. So that wasn't so bad. But, those guys have all gone away largely now. And I'm racing with a bunch of club racers. And as was earlier mentioned, if we're all racing on Scalextric tires and they're all equal, they're all equal. now and so you're going 1/10 of a second slower a lap. Like, who bloody cares as long as it's all somewhat competitive for the guys. But so many guys in our club are getting pissed off that they're not winning, and you help them with their cars. And so much of the bloody racing now with rubber tires, it's not, don't get me wrong, in most of these proxies, a car that in the GT3 proxy, for example, the bottom half of cars, it doesn't matter what bloody tires they've got on them, they're not going to win the race. But within the top 6 or 8 cars in terms of prep, it's all about tires. And I just think that's, I don't think it's good for the hobby.
They are the biggest differentiator, even more so than motors, I think. Certainly in our club, when we run BTCC as a class, it's keep the standard tyres on. You can use 3-in-1 oil on it, and that's it. And most people, I think people tend to stick to it. With our tuning class, we just defined a standard alloy bolt from Pendle motors, and I cast the tyres on the same evening in the same batch and gave everybody the same tyres from the same batch.
Perfect.
It was a great leveler. So we took the tyres out of the equation, because it's such a, if somebody spends a huge amount on a NSR tyres and somebody else runs standard, then there's a big difference. So yeah, we try and knock the tyres out of the equation by making them as equal as possible. So it's all about the driver's skill, not about the quality of the tyre they bought.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the prior conversation on IROC racing is a very valid point. Yeah. One of the things that we do, there's a commercial track in Toronto. It's more of a commercial club than a commercial track. But in order to try and get newer guys involved, we have one race. We race 2 or 3 classes a season, and one of the classes involves, it's got a breakout time. So the computer is set for 6 seconds. If you go faster than 6 seconds on a lap, your lap doesn't count. And normally how we do that is we'll say, okay, we're going to run a slotted Group C class. Pick anything you want. I'll take a slotted Group C car, put some tires on it that we sort of mandate, some urethanes or silicones or whatever we're going to do that round. Do some mild tuning on it, no exotic parts, just mild basic tuning, and then I'll drive it around the track. And if I can do a 6.2 seconds, I'll say the breakout is 6.1 seconds. So, guys you can put $100,000 motors in and ball bearings and all the rest of the crap in you want. If you're going faster than 6 seconds, it doesn't make a bloody difference. So it really helps me out in a bunch of ways. I don't have to really do much teching on the cars. I'll do a clearance rule and a width rule and, a few other little things, but I don't have to get too involved in it. If you want to run whatever you want to run, go right ahead. So I'm all for making the racing much more even now to really help the hobby out. Racing with the guys in our local club is great, but I've had some really good experiences racing around the world, and to beat guys on my own track in my basement now on a local club, like it's not a big thing for me. So I'd rather have close, good racing and a bunch of laughs and all the rest of the stuff. So to answer your question on tires, do the best you can and hope you get lucky.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That was my first crack. I had to qualify. I was the last car that actually made it into the field, which I thought, hey, that's good. But,
yeah.
I'm half a second off the pace, off the faster guys. And just looking at that last round, mine was the only car in qualifying, I think in the first of round 8 it was. That was just over the 10-second mark. Everybody else was under 10. It finished at the back. And on that hill climb track, it was the same. I was probably went worse on that than it did on the other track. So I just thought, no, well, I've got a chance. I'll ask.
No, and no disrespect at all.
No, none taken. That's what it's all about.
I've hosted a lot of proxies, and I see a lot of cars come into the shop, and there is no doubt you're probably suffering from not the best tires in the group. But I would suggest there is likely some other things on the car that, having not seen it, I would suggest there's probably a few other things that could probably be improved on.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt.
I'm going to log off now. It's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you all next time.
Cheers, Gary.
Goodbye.
See you, Gary.
Yeah, it's getting late over in the UK area, huh?
No, it's only just after 9 o'clock in the evening.
Oh, that's not too bad.
Yeah, guys.
The youngsters,
Unfortunately,
they have to get their sleep, these youngsters.
I'm gonna drop as well.
All right, thanks for
Next time,
coming.
Youngster, you.
Set myself up in a
Nice.
different room.
See you next
Before
time.
everybody,
Take
before
care.
everybody goes, I should say, Kelly, I think you've got the right formula. Don't try to get too clever too soon, because it sounds like you guys are having a lot of fun.
Well, that's, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the main thing. I don't know if you watch any of the other videos. Most of what I do is, I mean, I have quite a few adults that are regulars, but most of it is younger kids that I try to get involved, get them away from the video games, and actually do something where you can get hands on, teach them how to open up the cars, break the cars down, and you know, take a little bit of pride in what you're doing instead of just pushing buttons on the video game. And that's kind of the approach that we do. And so that's why I like NASCAR anyway, but that's the reason why I went to the NASCAR route, because it's a lot less to break on those cars than it is on the other cars. So that's kind of how we started. And then, like I said, I don't know any part of the tuning part of it, but I'm more into the designing, the painting, and the decaling of the cars and everything. And so that's what I do. I get cars, bought a whole bunch of lots, and I got a whole bunch of cars that I still have to paint. But I've been away from it for like about 2 years. And so now I'm starting to get back into it. And so I got a bunch of cars that I have to paint. And so what I usually do is paint cars, or I show the kids how to paint cars, and I let them paint their own cars and decal their own cars. And so just to get them interested in the racing. But like I said before, I'm in Nebraska, and it's just not a popular thing here. We have one club that's here, and they race Lexon, the plastic clear cars. They race the 124 scales. Very nice, Wayne. I like that. Very, very nice. And so, but
This
from
is
what
the old school one with the sliding mag.
Yeah.
When I talk to different people, is they
fast.
Oh, nice. That's nice as well.
Everybody's showing off their NASCARs.
Yeah, mine's is downstairs. I can't go get mine, so that's nice. That's very nice, Lance.
I got to run.
That was your proxy car, Lance.
Most surprisingly quick one.
Oh yes, I have that one.
CUDA. Yeah,
I have that CUDA.
An SCX CUDA with a little rotating pod wipes the floor with everything on my Scalextric technical sports track.
Yeah.
It outruns Slotted NSR, everything. It's about half a second quicker than a racer sideways.
Now, is that digital or is it analog?
It's digital, but it's got a Scalextric Mabuchi in it, not the SCX motor. It's a standard 18K Mabuchi. It's got my urethanes on the back. It is like it's glued to the track, but it hasn't got too much power, so you can hoof it most. You just have to come off it on the R1s. You don't have to drive it that hard, and the racer sideways, you have to concentrate a lot more. But yeah, get hold of one of these. It's unbelievably quick.
Hey,
you gotta get hold of one of them.
Let me ask you real quick, Richard. Are you using the SCX chassis on that, or did you put another?
Yeah, it's the standard SCX chassis. It's got a little pivoted
Adapter.
motor pod there.
Right,
Do you
right.
use the little adapters for the Mabuchi to fit into the SCX pod?
No, I glued the Mabuchi in.
No,
I
okay.
basically I cut the plastic end bell. I had to machine it a little bit to fit, and then I glued it into the pod.
Okay, because I'm like, I have probably about 60 or 70 SCX cars that I'm trying to switch over to Scalextric. So that's encouraging because I've already blown 3 chips trying to do it. So
Yes. Don't put SCX motors onto us. Their current draw is so high, it'll blow the chips. So yeah, it's cheaper just to replace the motors with cheap Scalextric motors. You do it needs a little bit of work, but yeah, if you're interested, Greg can put us in touch, and I'll send you photographs of what I did to the interior of this to adapt the motor.
Okay. Yes, definitely. I'm definitely interested.
Because the Scalextric motors are cheap enough. They're about $5 or $6 a piece. Not
Rich,
a lot.
what model of SCX motor is that, Rich? Is it 80 series or something?
It was the RX
42.
42.
Really? And that's drawing too much current.
Well, I changed the motor in this because we were running a V8 class, but it had to have a Scalextric motor in it.
Right, okay.
So whatever, so Carrera, SCX, Scaly, we had to change the motor to Scalextric so everybody had the same amount of power.
Oh, nice.
For whatever reason, and maybe I just had some magic juju when I did it, I had 4 SCX Aero NASCARs with the pod just like that, and I chipped them all with Scalextric retrofit single-seater chips, the weak ones. And the only thing that I did to, at the time I knew that was possible that the chips would blow. The only thing I did was take the magnets out.
Yeah, that makes a difference.
Put tires on that would have some grip as opposed to, but they ran great for years and years. I just sold them to a guy who's getting started with Scalextric, and he's having a blast with them. I did have one chip die sometime in the middle of all that, but I don't remember how or why. But I replaced it with another, retrofit single-seater chip, and it's great. So I know it's not just the motor. The magnet obviously is going to have some effect.
Yeah.
The worst thing you can do with any digitally chipped car is true the tires, because a motor will pull maximum current close to 0 revs. And if you're truing and you almost stall the tires on your grit on your paper, then it pulls maximum current, and that can actually blow the chip.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I would suggest if you guys are digital, is get yourself an analog mule, and just switch the axles into that and use that to true. So I've got a little setup plate, a powered setup plate, and I've got an inline and a sidewinder mule, and I just drop the axles into that. And I've blown a couple of motors, but they're analog, and they were tired old racing motors anyway, so it doesn't matter. But you can blow $20 worth of chip just because you trued the tires. And magnets is the same thing. It just makes it run hot, draws a lot of current, and cooks the chip.
I'd always buy a tire truer.
Say what?
Always buy a tire truer. Yeah, tire truer is a good investment. I mean, if you can find one at a good price,
I was going to say that's a difficulty. You get one to put a Scalextric axle on. They're just impossible to get at the moment. That thread you've been on, Greg.
Sorry, it's impossible to get one to put a Scalextric axle on?
You just can't buy one at the moment. There was a big article. Greg was on the thread on Slot Forum International about it. Don't tell me you got some in stock.
I race on Scalextric's plastic track. A tyre truer or truing it by hand seems to make no difference. If you're on wood, I totally get why you would want a tyre truer. But to be honest, with the bumps on a bumpy plastic track, truing it by hand is $200 cheaper.
$200, yeah, truing it by hand. I'll give you that. If you've got a nice rock steady hand, one of the guys in my digital club, he does all his by hand, just holding it gently on the sandpaper.
Yeah, I tend to rest my fingers on the ground and ease the thing down, so you're not having a wobbly hand, and it patience. That's the thing. It's just patience.
Yeah. So for the rest of us,
Yeah.
the Tire True was easily the best money I ever spent in slot car stuff in general.
Yes.
But yeah, they're hard to find at a good price these days. And the Tire Razor itself was one of the most affordable of that style, and apparently it's not readily available. The 3D printed one in that style, I have not. My friend who I printed it for hasn't built it up because he hasn't gotten all the parts for it. But he really liked the 3D printed Huddy style, one wheel at a time. He built that up, got all the hardware to put the 3D printed parts together. And other than reprinting a couple in ABS as opposed to PLA, which melts at a lower temperature, he was quite happy with it. But yeah, you can, like you said, for plastic track that's bumpy anyways, a hand truing is good enough.
Yeah.
But when you've got an egg for a wheel, it definitely needs to be done.
Well, my test is once I finish truing, I'll actually run the car on sandpaper without touching it. And if it doesn't bounce up and down, the tire's around.
Yep. The bounce test.
Yeah.
Anyway, guys, I've got to run.
Thanks for coming again, Chris.
Hey, see
Thanks,
you next
Chris.
week or whenever.
Yep.
Be good.
Be good. I'm not sure. Well, we're pushing 2.5 hours. Does anybody have anything else to talk about, or Andy?
Well, I just wanted to say there's one thing here in Germany that's quite popular too, because we were talking about the cost of the hobby and everything, and about Chris was talking about limiting the time of the track and stuff. I think the best translation, I think somebody told me in English, it's called a regulatory race, where you have to match your lap times.
Ah, yeah.
And they do that mostly because, like, for example, when you're racing pre-war Formula cars with tires that are, 1/8 of an inch wide, you just can't get them to go fast. And you don't want people to go fast because those things, the jewelers are making them and stuff. So it's really, really, really fine stuff. And, basically what they run it through some sort of an Excel thing where it throws away your worst lap and your best lap, makes an average, and then for every thousandth of a second you're off of your perfect lap, you get a penalty point. Yeah. And there are actually people who can get like sub 100 penalty points on races that go for 60, 70, 80 laps. It sounds boring, but it's really, really good for training, and I think it's a really, really good way to get people started into it. And this is of course always analog, where you switch, you go from lane to lane to lane. Because you really just sort of are concentrating on your car. You're not concentrating on what else is going on around you. And it really, there's no point in putting in the best motor or the best bearings or whatever. It's all about getting a nice, steady, smooth running car. We have a VW bus class where I actually, I damaged the body of mine, so I cut it off and made it into the VW pickup. And then I'd taken a computer apart, so I used the fan from the CPU, and I turned that into a jet turbine and put that on the end of it. So of course, you're totally top heavy. I had to put 100 grams of weight into it to keep it steady, but it didn't matter. I was turning, a Formula car on our track will do it in about 8.6 seconds, and most of the saloon style, the sedan cars, you're looking at sub 10 seconds. I was turning 13 seconds, but it didn't matter because I had to just match my times. And it looked absolutely hilarious with this turbine spinning going around the track. And, just VW buses that look cool anyway. And so that's one thing that we do over here when you really don't want people to spend a lot of money and you don't want them to damage the cars. You try to match your lap times. And that's just one thing that I don't see being done anywhere else in the world. But then again, I've not been around a lot of places. So that's just one little tip I wanted to get out there. People, maybe think about doing these regulatory races.
Yeah, Andy, local car clubs, 1-to-1 local car clubs do that. They call it bogey racing, where you get your bogey time and you have to try and hit it as many laps as you can on the local circuit.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And like I said,
Kelly, I've got something you might enjoy. Okay, but this is a Carrera. It's a little bit different because the
JC,
the front wheel steer.
Ah.
Yeah, and
Chase
The
car.
whole thing rocks on its chassis.
I've driven that very car. It's a really interesting drive, that car.
So
It's fabulous, Rich,
it's a chase car's chassis.
Fabulous thing to
It
drive.
is digital, but if you film it in slow motion, you can actually go around leaning on an opposite lock around the corner, and it is slow as hell, but it's so much fun because you can just because it's got such narrow tires as well, it'll just sit the tail out on order. But because the LED is in the front of the guide, you can be sideways over a lane changer or a lap counter, and it works. And it's a lot of fun. So yeah, the chassis are available from a guy, a thing called Chase Cars, and
Is
it
he
is.
still making? Is he still producing? Because he wasn't at Gaiden last year.
I think Gareth is still around. I had a message from him the other day because he designed my sure change guides for me before I got into CAD. But yeah, it's a huge amount of fun. It's slow, but the smiles you get when you finish racing around the track is brilliant.
Look who we have joining us with his video turned on. Gio, would you like to talk a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, what can I say? Most of you, I think, know me as Gruns on, or Grunts, I mean, depending how you want to pronounce it, on Slot Forum. So I think I kind of, I'm a digital racer and I've done a bit of analog as well. I like both, but I prefer digital mainly because in my small club here, we race like longer races. I mean, one race usually is half an hour, and we have like 3 or 4 races depending on the class that we are racing. And we add a lot of extra kind of bit by adding like simulations on during the racing. So that strategy is the most important bit because you have to conserve the car, the fuel, the tires. And so it's not just like an analog where you go for 3 minutes as quick as possible, and then you do a lot of sitting and marshalling the track or the race or other cars. So everybody's racing at the same time for the whole morning or whatever is the session. So, but I can do analog as well. I mean, there is a part of one of the components I like in analog is the preparation of the car, because last week we're talking about grapes or grip on a track, and I think wood tracks can give you a lot of grip, but I'm talking about like bare wood without any magnetic traction. But in order to prepare a car to go well on wood, you really have to work hard first on tires, because I think it's like 80% of the performance first comes from tires preparation, and then chassis and pod and everything else. I find like a plastic, I mean, I race mainly on Scalextric sport. I find the plastic much more forgiving, let's say. So I still throw my tires if I want to prepare a car properly on Razor, as Greg was saying. I mean, one of the best tools out there. I mean, you cannot do analog racing of wood without having a tire thrower. I tried and I felt miserable. So the first year was really frustrating. But for plastic, you can go easily, the kind of things that I usually do is throwing the front tires, the two, I don't know if you can see, but basically I give like a bit of tapers in such a way that the car or the front tires of the car would just touch the edges. So give stability to the car without having a lot of extra grip. So that's what I do when I prepare the car for plastic. And now we're using, like on Scalextric, we're using P6 tires, so slotted ones, and we don't throw them. We just, stick on the rim and race it. So just like the truck do the throwing for you. It works pretty well. I also enjoy so I usually here we're racing very small tracks. I mean, like 20 meters, or even the analog club where I go is not that big, bigger than my garage plastic track. But sometimes I also like to go in Europe to do like a disc car racing. So I've done a couple of events. I know Martin, we did it was a think for you was the first time that you did the 24 hours in 2017, right?
Yeah, I still remember the sleep deprivation, Gio.
Yeah.
And I still remember the coffee that, what's his name, Antonio from Fall Asleep Or made me drink. Jesus.
Yeah.
My heart, I'm still...
So, yeah. So I really enjoy those kind of races because again, they are mainly endurance racing with the team. So you kind of, even if you're not on the rostrum with the controller, you're still racing because even if you're marshalling, but you're looking at your car to see whether there are any issues and jumping in the pit if there is anything. So it's still you're still more involved than just sitting there in a kind of analog race on wood where you have to, just put someone else's car back into the track when you're marshalling. And and basically, I was much more active on slot forum before, try to, bring, not converting, but, representing digital in the right way, because there is still a bit of, some people, especially coming from analog, do not get it what it is. So try to share my experience and, but then you get to mess up with other people that really have another kind of agenda, and I could not really hold myself back. And you have seen a bit of mess. If you're reading the slot forum international, you know what I'm talking about, without needing to mention specific people. And at the moment, I kind of taking a step back. I don't give a shit about publishing on a slot forum because I'm dead on the server the time and effort they ever put for that. So screw them and screw the person that basically put me in that condition. And that's me in a polite way, because I could go even much harder if you want me to.
Now, we all know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, thank you.
Richard does a very, so thanks to Richard, actually, so Mr. Modifier on Slot Forum, I moved from magnetic racing, so when I had my Scalextric car, to mag racing. So because I bought from Richard the kind of huge batch of urethane tires for Scalextric's rims. So before Scalextric moved to Euro standard rims, so basically they have like Carrera, so the rims were all different, and we're racing GT3, Scalextric's GT3, and Richard made excellent tires. I still have that batch.
Yes, I make them too well. They last too long. Well, I'm glad they're still working for you, Gio.
Yeah, with Scalextric's moving to this new set of rims also for GT3, so they basically scrap the GT3 class, because now you have a Sidewinder full interiors with different tires, and now the new ones that are in line with the Euro rims, so they are not kind of any more comparable. So we are not. I'm not using any Scalextric's GT3 at the moment. So usually either we go for the upper class NSR GT3 side scale auto sideways, or Carrera. So Carrera, for instance, I love the GT3 cars. So it's a huge class. They're all the same. They've never changed. Kind of similar type of gearing and motors. So they've done a good job, I think.
Wayne, you were talking about North Briz slots. Do you race with them? I see their videos all the time, and their track is just fantastic.
Yeah, I don't race with him all the time, but I've had a couple of goes up there. That's pretty much the only sort of digital I've done. I don't think I've ever raced on plastic digital. I have Ninko digital that I bought originally, but I haven't had that out for God knows how long. But it's an awesome track. Awesome. And he started off mainly just scalar digital, but they also run the Slots Works V8 cars, the 124 scales, which he puts a slotted chip in them, and they run them there, and they are just awesome. And now he's moving slightly towards the more 124 scale now. they've dropped off the plastic cars because they're getting a lot of damage. And so they're running the Slotworks Porsches, and they're using 32 scale. I think they're using muscle cars now with Pluffett chassis, and he's chipping those. But I haven't done that yet. I raced with him I only drove the V8s a couple of times, and then he did a 6-hour enduro with the Slotwork cars. And I was teamed with John actually, and we won that. And then a couple of guys from where we race on our analog track down in the Gold Coast. I'd been up there and raced a couple of times, and then we went up and did a 6-hour GT3 enduro with the Scaly cars. And we came third, I think, in the first one, and we'd never raced on the track. So that was quite good. And then we went and done a British touring car 4-hour, I think it was, and we won that. And then we had another crack at the GT3 one, and we didn't do any good. And then they also had a Trans Am one, and we raced the Scaly Javelin and that, and we won that. So we've had a pretty good record up there from not being regulars. So it is a great track, fantastic. And John's an absolute whiz. He mods chips, repairs them for anyone if they have a problem. He's just a great bloke.
I'm definitely jealous every time I see pictures of or video of his races. That looks great.
Yeah, he usually does a Facebook Live on race nights as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a fun track. Very fast. That downhill, back straight down that, you just hold it flat.
Flat out, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anybody else want a question or topic? I think we're reaching our limit for this one.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Greg. It's been good.
Yeah, this is going as better than I could have expected. So it's been a pleasure having you guys all on, and hopefully Lance will have a functioning microphone next time. But I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting. Does anybody have any last things they want to say? Or
well, that's a shame. Lance just said he was in Australia last month on vacation, and he went to Sydney and Melbourne. Mr. Slotco is a fabulous place. He's down in Melbourne. He's got upstairs. He's got a massive 8-lane scale track up there, 4-lane drag strip that he's just finished not long ago. Downstairs, he's got about 4 tracks with all sorts of things, and now he makes those modular routed tracks that he's selling over here now, and you can just buy bits to fit in, and he's amazing.
We need more of that around the world, that's for sure.
Yeah, sure do.
All right, thanks for everybody for coming. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.